I have to be able to see him, I think. Oh, there he is. Do you solemnly swear that you will faithfully and impartially perform the duties of the office to which you have been appointed?
I do.
You're all set. Okay.
Congratulations, and thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, if you need me, Jenny, just give me a call.
Will do.
Thanks.
All right, I will hit record.
All right, we have we have a quorum. I don't see Greg yet, but I think we have everyone else. And I see. Let's see. Oh, there's Greg joining us. Perfect. I see Amy and Robin. And just one Amy. Okay, I think we're ready to go. All right. Good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, January 14th, 2025, 6:31 p.m. This is a meeting of the Bolton Advisory Committee. And we have a full team of 6 members, which is for the first time in a while. It's fantastic. Okay, so first up in our agenda is actually just a quick discussion with our Neshoba Regional School District school committee reps. And let's see, I see Robin and Amy Vessels, and I don't, Amy Cohen is not here. Is that right? It's here. Okay. Anyway, I will launch into it. So I have a handful of slides to share, and then we can have some discussions. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. So I just wanted to give a quick preview of the situation as we're looking at it now, kind of in the middle of the budget season here. This is a look at our current estimates for revenue for fiscal year 26. So fiscal year 25 levy limit was about 25.5 million. Our Proposition 2.5% increase over that is about 640,000. And we're estimating new growth of 150,000. That's really a rough estimate at this point. So the estimated new revenue that we can generate for fiscal year 26 is about $790,000. That does not include any debt exclusions that might be voted on at town meeting. We don't know what any of that is yet. And it doesn't assume any increases in local receipts. It assumes that those stay constant. So that's our projected revenue for 26. I went back a few years and I took a look at the previous assessments going back to fiscal year 19. These are the Neshoba School District assessments to Bolton. The blue bars are operating expenses only, and then the orange bar is operating expenses plus any debt that was included in there. And so you can see in the pre-COVID years, we were at around 5% a year. I think the big drop in 20 and 22, I'm sure there was some COVID influence there, although I don't know what the details are. And then coming out of that in 23 was up around 4%. 24 was closer to 3%, and then for FY25, about 4.5%. And the big jump in the debt burden, of course, is for the new high school build. So that just gives you a sense of where we've been sitting. It's been between 3 and 5% for the last few years. Okay, so last year's assessment to Bolton was 18.9 million or so. That represented 60% of our operating expenses for FY25. So if we look at assessment scenarios going into FY26, what I plotted here are just a straight, 2 to 5% increase in the operating budget. I've assumed that the debt stays constant. And you can just see what the impacts will be in terms of how much additional funding will be required to meet the assessment. And so you can see that somewhere between 4 and 5%, you cross the line where the assessment will consume all of the new revenue that we can generate in FY26. If you look at it and say, well, but actually the school assessment is 60% of the operating expenses. So in a sense, you could say, you know, the school district's fair share is no more than 60% of the new revenue. Then you could look at where that falls and say, well, you know, that is somewhere between 2 and 3% consumes that fair share of the school's assessment of our new revenue. So that's sort of where it stands in terms of the assessment versus new revenue. The other wrench in the works this year, of course, is that we are headed down the path of a possible Prop 2.5 override. And, you know, the assessment is obviously going to have a big impact on the total budget. So even something, you know, like a 3% increase would be, may not be practical for us to be able to support or sustain this year. Okay, so those are the slides. I just wanted you to kind of see where we are, and now I'll just open it up for discussion. Any thoughts from our school committee reps? I'm sure that I'm sure budgets are tight all around.
I can start. I want to apologize for being late to join the meeting. I just wrote down the wrong time, so sorry for that, but
That's
I
all
got
right.
the gist of what you're saying. And I think a few things to keep in mind. You know, tomorrow night is the school committee's budget workshop where we'll be presented with all of the details, I guess is a way of saying it. And the budget that will be presented tomorrow night is the initial budget that kind of represents what the district views as the most appropriate way to deliver the educational product that they think we deserve. But it's just the starting point. And I know that you have data from prior years that show that our increases have usually landed between 2 and 5% or 3 and 5%, but the budget tomorrow night is going to start off showing a higher increase than that. And that seems to be the way that the process works each year, is where we start with a number that represents what, if there were unconstrained resources, what the district thinks we should what we need to deliver the best educational product we can. But usually over the next few months, we will refine those numbers and find efficiencies that end up coming closer to that 3 to 5% that you've been showing us. However, I think that we all need to prepare for this override scenario that you mentioned at the end of your presentation. And so one question I had was, do you know if Bolton has plans on announcing that publicly or registering that with DESE, or there seems to be a database that you can look up what towns are planning overrides, and I didn't see Bolton on it. So is that something you're aware of that's in the works?
It's not something I'm aware of. Marie, did you want to make a
I'm,
comment?
I'm not aware of an override registry database that's official. I do know the select board begrudgingly indicated they would support an override if likewise the district were experiencing some cuts likewise, because we're not expanding town services, we're just trying to maintain them. I do know there's the database on Mass DOR DLS of overrides that have been put forth on a ballot and the status of those, but nothing in the preliminary phase.
So I know historically, I showed data that said the assessment's been in the 3 to 5% neighborhood. I think this year, a 2% increase would be something that we would rather see than a 3 to 5% increase. And as you have the budget discussions and you're presenting, you know, the Bolton's perspective, we'd love to see you do as much as you can to get it down to below 3%.
Yeah, well, that might be a big ask, but it's good to have yeah, I don't know really how to respond to that. Amy Vessels or Leah, do you want to?
I would just
weigh
jump in
in?
and say that it's really challenging physically. I mean, not just for our district. I mean, the district that I teach in, we're having many cuts. So I think that, you know, the state formula, that's something that Kirk is certainly lobbying for, because districts did not get as much in their fund, like Chapter 70 funds, as they expected. And it's just, it is a very challenging, and certainly that's what we're looking at. I mean, I think Kirk has always done a good job of looking at how to make the positions efficient across the district. He's always looking at school enrollment and seeing where he needs to shift positions, and you know what I mean, so that he's not just hiring you know, without considering those things. So I mean, we're certainly going to be working, because especially with the new high school on board, we're very cognizant of, you know, what people are going to be paying, and that certainly adds another element to this, and we're aware of that. But I also just think that it is a very challenging time right now. And I think you know, when you look at the database, how many schools around us are asking for overrides, I mean, you know, it's a lot. And so I think that, you know, we are doing the best we can to address that. And we're certainly going to keep in mind what you said, but it is a very challenging, it's just very challenging right now with the costs.
And we appreciate that too. I know it's not easy for anyone. Okay. Other comments or questions from anyone?
Yeah, I have a comment. I'm a little concerned that if we do end up doing a 2.5 override this year, I'm not quite sure what's going to change next year, that you're not going to want another 3 to 5%, and we're going to be right in the same path with an even bigger budget to deal with.
I think that if you, my video doesn't seem to be updating. I don't know if I'm frozen and you could see I was raising my hand, so I apologize for jumping in. But I think that if you look to the example of what happened in Lancaster last year, they had to do an override in order to pass the school budget. And I think I didn't realize this until today when I was talking with the school committee chairperson, that one of the consequences or effects of that is that it does allow your levy limit to increase, so that the next year you won't find yourself in the same position of having to do another override, because it kind of raises the base level once you go through the pain of the first override. So
I understand that, but if we're adding 3 to 5% per year, doesn't take too many years before we can't do that anymore, before having yet another 2.5 override.
yeah, I mean, I think that part of I think it's important to just remember that the budget presented by the school committee is not proposing extravagant new programs or you know, it's really just reflecting increases in teacher salaries, insurance premiums, special education, transportation related costs. And so those are just basic requirements of education. And the other piece of the puzzle that I think really needs to be mentioned when we're talking about the need for an override is that we need to be thinking creatively and working together to come up with ways of coming up with revenue sources, new revenue sources for the town. However that ends up playing out, I think that, you know, this is going to force us to start putting that at the forefront of our discussions. And I know that part of what we're going to talk about tomorrow night is going to be how we can find more efficiencies within the school budget, you know, to try to lessen the impact on all of us. I'm a taxpayer too. I mean, but that is part of the puzzle of how we can generate more revenue.
Hey, Bob, this is Greg. Just a question on process. Is an override just a decision the town makes, or is there a risk that we won't achieve an override, or either through the voters or through the state, or what's the probability of an override should we determine we absolutely need one?
So if, you know, we'll put the budget together, which may or may not include an override. And if it includes an override, the town will vote. And if the results are either the whole thing gets accepted or the whole thing gets rejected. If it gets rejected, we're back to the drawing board, but we are running right up against the end of the fiscal year. So it becomes very challenging at that point.
And at that point, another process question is the funding for the school already done? Is it already decided at that point when the town meeting happens?
If 2 of the 3 member towns approve their budgets, then it's a done deal.
So if in the scenario where the override is not approved, 2 of the 3 towns approve the school budget, what happens to our budget, the town remainder?
Nothing good.
Right. We have to scramble to come up with an alternate budget prior to, and get it voted on at another town meeting prior to the 1st of July. I don't know what happened on that. I don't know what happened.
I think if 2 of the 3 towns pass the budget, then the budget is the budget.
So the school would get their budget, but we would have to cut the town's portion to make up the difference.
Yeah, so police, fire,
Correct.
buildings, all these get cut after the school budget has been decided and the town in that scenario decided not to approve an override.
Yeah, I think this is why it's critical to start thinking through a scenario of getting an override passed, because nothing good comes of a scenario where it doesn't pass, because the corollary could be said about the school district. If the school district's budget is not passed, then we're looking at severe cuts there too. I mean, Amy Vessels was speaking to what's going on in Hudson now, where 50 to 60 positions are being cut because of this this exact scenario playing out. So,
Stan, you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Bob. Just to clarify, Bolton's going to need some form of override regardless. So it's not a case of we may or may not need an override. If the district comes in with a budget that's no more than it was last year, so basically the assessment goes up by 0, we're still going to need at least $1 million override. So an override is inevitable. Right now, it's a function of how much more the district's assessment for Bolton goes up, and what we may or may not be able to cut from ours. So In the case of if the override fails, basically the budget that we present anticipating an override, that basically fails as well. So we'll have to present a plan B, which will be making up whatever the override was, we're gonna have to cut out of our budget. And that's anywhere from 1 million or more dollars, depending upon where you see. Now, if two of the towns vote the budget down, and the way it works is it's not that they vote your budget down, the district, they either have to vote their budget up or down. We can't individually vote the district's budget down. It's an all or nothing kind of situation. So there is an override is inevitable. It's just a function of how much that override is going to be at the end of the day. So we're going through the process now, and the budget worksheets and what Nanachka has as far as the overall town budget has assumed whatever each of the departments have put in based upon the criteria that we've asked them to do. And we've anticipated, we've put a placeholder in there for some amount of a budget increase in the district. And right now that budget is showing a $1.7 million shortfall. So we need to collectively figure out how to make that number as small as possible.
The 1.7 million is using a projection of what the school districts.
Yes,
Increase
it
the
has a
spending?
4% increase in there. We just put a placeholder in there, and obviously Bob had indicated, we desperately need that number to be much lower than 4%. But right now, with the plugging a 4% increase into your budget, which is sort of in the middle of the 3 to 5, we're looking at a $1.7 million deficit.
Bill, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, Amy or any other school rep, do you know what, going into the budget workshop, do you know what the assessment increase is currently?
It's higher than what we're talking about. To
5%
start off with.
plus?
It is right now, but
Okay.
it's the starting point and it's not going to be the ending point.
I understand. I just want to get a number to see how it progresses.
Yeah, I apologize. I logged on my phone, so I don't have it in front of me. I don't know if the other members do, but I do believe the meeting materials are posted on our website now, so you could look it up and see.
Okay,
But
thank you.
I think it's more than that.
Okay, great. Does anyone have anything else for our school committee reps? Okay, so we just wanted to give you the sense of the situation as we're looking at it right now. So when you go into the budget battles, you can fight the good fight on our behalf, and best of luck in the budget wars.
Thank you. Thanks for
Okay.
the invitation tonight.
Great, thank you. Of
Yes,
course, you're
thank you.
welcome to stick around if you want to see the rest of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we will move on. Next up, we're going to start reviewing some department budgets, and I think Brian Stearns is here. We're going to hit the Veterans Agent budget first.
Good evening.
Hi, Brian. Okay, I'm going to share the budget spreadsheet. Okay, can everyone see that? I'm not at the right spot, of course.
There you go.
Okay. Here we are. All right. Brian, can you just quickly walk us through the line items in your budget?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. It's pretty much across the board, zero increase. Veterans benefits remain at 33,000, but I anticipate on that veterans benefits line, which covers Chapter 115, I anticipate that going down throughout the year. because we are losing, I anticipate losing one of our veterans off the benefits. There's been some changes in his income, so that may tick down a bit. So that's good news for anybody who needs a little extra money. I'm not sure how much it's going to be. I'm looking at in the range of around 10,000. So everything else stays the same except the salary line that's gone up just a 0%. So as you can see, it's the same as last year. No changes, really.
No change. All
But,
right.
entertain any questions you may have, though.
Anyone have questions for Brian? Okay, if there are no questions, is there a motion to approve the Veteran Services budget for 40,932?
I move we approve the Veteran Services budget for 40,932.
I'll second that.
Roll call. Don,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
Greg,
Aye.
Craig,
Aye.
and Brian.
Aye.
Great, and I'm an aye as well. All right. Brian Stearns, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
All right, you too. Okay, Council on Aging, and we have Lisa and Penny here.
Right. Hello, good evening.
Hello, great to see you. Thank you for joining.
No worries, good to be here.
Okay, and Lisa, same thing. Could you just quickly walk us through the?
Sure, yep. There are really no changes to the budget except for our building lease. Our rent at the Bolton Country Manor will be going up slightly. So from October 25 to June 26, it will be a $20 increase per month. So that's why it's going from $47.50 to $49.92. Otherwise, everything is exactly the same.
And there's a step increase in the salary, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Questions for Lisa? Anyone? Not, is there a motion to approve the Council on Aging budget for 130,908?
I move we approve the Council on Aging budget for 130,908.
I'll second that.
Roll call. Don,
Aye.
Bill?
I recuse on this one, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Greg,
Aye.
Craig,
Aye.
Brian,
Aye.
and I'm also an aye.
Great.
All right,
Thank you.
Andy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too. Okay. The next one is our fire and EMS budget, and our fire chief, Jeff Legendre, is here. All right. Jeff, how are you? Great to see you.
Good, and yourself?
Good. Okay, let me get up to that section. Okay, here we go. All right. Go ahead, Jeff, if you can walk us through these.
Sure, absolutely. So with the salary increases or step raises for the full-time employees, myself, the full-time firefighter, due to the newly current CBA, the increases for the call firefighters are reflected in there. Other than those two accounts, we either leveled out at 0 or like in the ALS, we're able to decrease 50% because we're showing that we're covering more calls with our own staff and not having to rely on the area services that prior provided ALS. So we continue to drop that. We started off a couple years ago at 30,000. We're down to 4,000 at this point. Other than that, we're at zero throughout the whole budget and all the line items. Excuse me, there was one increase in medical supplies by $1,000. The market has gone up considerably with purchasing products for the ambulance, so there was a $1,000 bump there.
I had a quick question on wages. Are there any collective bargaining negotiations that are still pending?
There is the collective bargaining agreement with Local 170 expired on June 30th of this year. They're currently negotiating another contract at this point.
And so the estimate of 331,000, how did you arrive at?
That's reflective of the increase. It was overall probably about a 15% increase. New stipends, new hourly wages, new steps, longevity, everything figured in there. And then a figuration on hours that were being covered previously is how I came up with new total.
And so could that potentially go up?
With a new contract, yes, it very well could.
And so if we vote on this budget tonight, knowing that that number is going to change, is the balance made up for in the compensation reserve fund that we will build into the budget? Or is this something that we're just going to have to come back and re-vote on later? That might be a question for Marie. Sorry.
I was going to say, if you could defer to Marie on that one, please.
It's a Marie question, and likely it would require coming back.
Okay. So I wonder if it's worth just holding off. If we know this number is going to change, I wonder if it's worth holding off on the vote.
I guess the question is, will we have an answer by the time we need it?
That's a good question.
Next session is Thursday morning, and this would be our 9th session this fiscal year. Likewise, small warrant articles close on February 21, which I intend to also remind the negotiating team. Yeah.
Okay. Did anyone have questions on any of the other items aside from salary and wages?
Yeah, I got a couple. I was just curious, Chief, on the fire ponds. We haven't spent any money yet this year on there. Are we really going to hit the 20? Or is there?
We are going to hit the 20. What we did this time is assess all of the fire ponds, from the electric pumps to cleaning to pipe condition. That report was done by the officers. Now we're going to enact it as the spring comes up.
So you're fixing the pumping equipment?
Yep.
Or
We have a couple pump failures. We have a couple electrical failures. We have some pipe that needs attention that comes out of the pond. We have some other cleaning and possibly some dredging that needs to go on. We wanted a full category of all the fire ponds and what work needed to be done so we could establish a priority list.
Okay. Same basic question on the cadet program, on the EMT cadet program. We haven't really spent any money as of December. Are we going to be investing that on new cadets by the end of the year?
So the process the past couple of years is the cadets are actually trained by a third party company. And at the end of the conclusion of their EMT, which tends to be around April and May, there is a substantial check cut from that fund to pay for that. And that will go to zero pretty quickly in May. Through the year, starting in July, we do pay the 2-3 coordinator and the cadet director. But then there's a pretty substantial withdrawal at the conclusion of the EMT class.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
I've got a quick one, Chief. Back on the wages with the firefighters. What you said earlier made sense, but is the total number of firefighters going up or changing?
I don't foresee
A headcount change?
substantial number leaving or coming that would impact that at this point.
Okay, got it. Clear. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so I think what I'll suggest is we can vote on this now in the event that the number doesn't change, that the collective bargaining agreement is not in place, you know, in the next couple of months. And if it does change, we'll just revote. Sounds okay to everyone?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the fire EMS budget for $758,932?
I move we approve the fire and EMS budget for $758,932.
I'll second that.
Roll call. Don?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Greg?
Aye.
Craig?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. Okay, and Chief Legendre, I am not tracking any capital expenses for you? Or
Nope,
capital requests for you?
we did not put in for any capital this year.
Great, that makes that easy.
Yep.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the rundown of the budget.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.
Mr. Chief.
Okay. Excellent. So that's the budget review items. We're on to other advisory committee business. So the one thing I wanted to bring back up this week after our meeting last week is the discussion of the Capital Stabilization Fund. I think the select board is cross-posted this week, so we can have some more detailed discussions if we would like to do that. So from last week, the discussion was, you know, is there value in establishing one or more capital stabilization funds, either for vehicle purchases, building repairs, other capital expenses as necessary? And I think there's sort of two pieces to this. One is there might be a long-term discussion and process we can think about of putting in place some capital stabilization funds that, you know, if we want to get them on the warrant this year, we still have a little time to discuss that and get them on there. Or if we want to kick the can down the road till next year, we can have a longer discussion. I think the more near-term discussion was this started in the context of a police vehicle, and we're reviewing the police budget next week. If that's something we want to pursue, we should really nail it down, our approach down this week. Again, if it's something that's not going to come into play for a police vehicle, we have more time. So I'll open it up to thoughts, discussion.
Marie, the example you sent from Harvard was really good. Thank you for sending that. I think that set a good example of a potential approach we could take, and I thought it was it made a lot of sense. So I know the numbers would vary, and we would potentially pick different items to capitalize and put in a stabilization fund, but in principle, it sounded like it has been and continues to work pretty well with Harvard. Is that sort of your understanding?
I think that a capital stabilization fund works if you set parameters as in this much of our free cash or this much of a dedicated source of revenue will be set aside exclusively for capital. Did want to say, though, to Bob's question about the police vehicle is going forward per, well, I believe the select board's recommendation and mine in the raise and appropriate budget for fiscal 26. But I do encourage advisory to make a determination of how we will be funding our future capital if you wish to set some parameters and to have those in place before, say, the fall.
Do we, if I understood the process from Harvard, and Stan, you also educated us as well last week. It's a multi-step process. We have to go first in front of the town and just get approval to create a fund, even if it's $0. And then secondly, we have to get approval to fund it with a certain dollar amount for a given year. And every year after that, we have to continue down that path. Is that right?
Correct. And for Marie's point about finding a source to fund that, I mean, you could set aside a portion of free cash. You could say that the cell tower revenue is dedicated to that and put cell tower revenue in there, and that just happens every year. You could say that, you know, the cannabis facility that's up at Country Cupboard, the revenue we're getting from that could go in there. But you probably want to define sort of a reoccurring revenue stream that says, okay, this revenue stream is going to fund, you know, the capital stabilization fund, and then, you know, determine what the parameters are for how you can spend that money and what type of capital. I think Marie was clear. I think, you know, as I mentioned last time, we in years past had some discussion, and unfortunately the police cruiser came out and it was a separate line item in the annual town meeting warrant, which met with not very good results. So I think for something that is critical as that, I mean, either we jointly can decide whether or not we're going to fund or not fund a cruiser, but I'll restate my position that I think that is something that should not fall outside of the budget. It has been proven year after year that is a requirement, given, you know, what they're using the vehicles for, and the amount of deterioration and depreciation and expenses in terms of repair. So, I mean, you know, if you want to talk about a backhoe or a pickup truck or, you know, something along, that's, I think, you know, something that's more appropriate for that, but not a police cruiser. And I think our police chief would probably agree strenuously with that position. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
So I have 2 comments I'd like to make. The first is my interpretation of that DLS document on capital stabilization funds, and someone who knows more, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my interpretation was after you get the fund approved with a 2/3 vote at a town meeting, every subsequent year, you can put a line in your budget that says we're going to move X number of dollars into the stabilization fund, and the vote is just the normal budget vote. You don't have to vote every year on the capital stabilization fund separately.
You don't have to vote to like recreate the capital stabilization fund. You're absolutely correct. It is
or to move money into it.
To put money into it, if you're apportioning your free cash in the same way that we apportion our free cash every year, one would be doing that. If you're following on Stan's idea of dedicating your cell tower revenue, that just happens in the background.
And even in the free cash example, isn't that just built into the budget? And when the vote comes up on the budget, the vote to approve the budget also approves that.
You would be voting to put free cash into the capital stabilization. That would be an ongoing annual vote.
Yeah. Okay, so my second comment regarding the police cruiser, you know, my only concern this year, I'm not at all opposed to buying a police cruiser, and I'm in favor of that. My only concern this year is when we present a budget and present an override to close that budget. The fact that we have a capital expense within the operating budget and don't afford the town the opportunity to vote yes or no on a capital expense I just worry that that may not go over well. I realize there is risk that having a capital expense called out separately. I guess the question is there more risk in the cruiser getting voted down, or is there more risk in the entire budget getting voted down because we've annoyed the voters that we have a capital expense built into the operating budget? That's my only concern, and I understand the arguments on both sides.
Yeah, I don't think we've had a lot of arguments that a cruiser is in the budget. We've had more arguments when it's not in the budget and it's a separate line item. That needs to be voted separately. And I think we should make a decision, is it either in or out? And if it's in, then we need to justify why it's in. And if we decide that, no, we can't afford the 65 grand, then we need to make the justification to the taxpayers, and we need to make the justification to the chief of police. But I think we shouldn't leave it up to the whims of town meeting vote, because that has gone very badly in the past.
Okay. Other comments? All right, I'm getting the sense that that's the general consensus, and we should just continue to do what we've been doing.
On the police cruiser.
On the police cruiser, yes,
Yeah.
sorry, specifically on the police cruiser.
But I am in favor, in parallel, of at least taking that first step in creating the capitalization stabilization fund. Capital
Yep,
stabilization.
absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay,
I agree.
and is that something that we want to pursue this year and get on the warrant this year, even if we don't put a lot of money into it this year?
That'd be my vote. Yep.
Yeah, I think it can work in our favor if, in addition to asking the town for an override, we are presenting some proactive steps that we're taking to help sustain us in the future.
Would they be perceived as helping us in the future or just spending more money, though?
I think it will come down to the way we present it, right? I think if we present it as, here are the pros to a stabilization fund, we can set aside money for these uses in the future, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, I agree with it. It's more the timing with the override that is my only concern.
My 2 cents worth, for what it's worth, is that now is the appropriate time to bring it up and show that we're thinking about future responsible budget management and planning for the future. I think it's the exact right time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So that sounds great. If we're going to move forward, then what are the next steps? Do we need like a little team to come up with some language, or do we need to think about the parameters of this fund?
I would say
Marie,
yes
what do
and
you think?
yes. Yeah, I would say yes and yes, and then it would be added to the list of town meeting articles. Yeah. So.
Okay. Do you think that's appropriate for someone on advisory to be working on that, or I don't want to throw Ninotchka under the bus, or is that something you and Ninotchka would work, or who should help craft this?
I would recommend, if it were okay with advisory, to have an advisory member, Ninotchka and me.
That sounds great. Any volunteers from advisory?
I think there's pretty standard language in creating a fund like this.
Mm-hmm.
It's more if we want to talk about dedicating revenue
And
this year.
parameters. Yeah.
Bob, I'd be happy to help if Marie, you'll have me.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That sounds great. All right, excellent. Okay. I think that's the end of our agenda. Anyone have anything else?
I had a raw thought, and I'd just like to throw this out for consideration as along the same lines of looking forward and trying to get us out of any shortfalls in the future as best we can. I was wondering if there could be a, I don't know, sort of a protocol put in where if people can demonstrate to the select board's satisfaction that if we do business differently and we could save money on the budget, that we share that savings with that person. So if an employee comes in and says, hey, we should do it this way, not that way, and we save $10,000, they get 5, we save 5. Just the thought, I would love to hear anybody's thoughts.
Marie, Kate,
Uh,
Stan?
It's sort of similar to like the federal whistleblower legislation. Yeah,
Yeah, but more positive, and like I say, one of the important keys to it is I know there's always somebody out trying to game the system or something, but I would say it has to be subject to the select board's approval.
I think we need to consult with Mass General Law on that because it doesn't necessarily sound like something that they would condone. It's a great idea, but we got to be real careful here with payments to individuals.
Sure.
So yeah.
And I guess my thought on it as well would be if somebody has an idea for how to save $10,000, they should be raising that with their department head, and their department head should be doing that, and we shouldn't have to give a kickback. That should just sort of be the way we
Couldn't
operate.
agree with you more.
So
Could
that's
not
my
agree
thought
with
of
you
it.
more. But I'm just, from what the business cases I've studied and how the quote unquote real world seems to work, I thought this might help. And it would also send a message to the taxpayers that, yes, we're looking at this and we're trying to come up with ways to lessen the burden and to be efficient.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else?
I just
Great.
wanted to provide one caveat. All contracts are in play. When you were speaking with the fire chief, the fiscal 25 current fiscal year contract is, up, and those dollars, should there be ratification, would be affecting fiscal 25. But as you look at the budgets for fiscal 26, realize that both the DPW as well as police lines are in negotiation.
Right. And when do we have to keep that in mind when we plan for the compensation reserve as well? Does that come into play, or is that a different?
One could pull out any additive amounts to the wage line in an article following the approval of the budget. So, we're approving a budget for 100, and then subsequently we ask to increase the wage line by 10 for the police, in reflection of the contract.
I see. Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, anyone else have anything? If not, well, we meet again next week. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Great. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Good night.
All right.
Good night.
Night.
Thanks, Jenny.